Let's continue looking at Lakshmana Temple in central India. So we're going to be looking at how it is typical of Hindu sacred spaces. So we already watched this video. If you haven't watched the video, make sure that you look at it. It is located on Smart History, I believe, at the end of the information, or you can get it here. So the function is that it's obviously a Hindu temple, but this one is dedicated to Vishnu, who is the preserver of the universe. And so this was built during the reign of King Yasovarman of the Chandala kingdom. And he built several different temples in this region, and they were to house various images that were brought from Tibet. So this one is one of the oldest temples that is in this region, and it's covered with nearly 600 images of the various gods in Hinduism. So remember, unlike Christianity and Islam, there is not one god, but many gods. And this one is, I would say, famous or notorious because there are several sexual images carved on the southern side of the temple. And so we'll see, this is the one that's in the image set that we see at the bottom of this image. We'll talk more closely about it later. So content, right? So, what it is and what it is, what are the different parts of the temple. It has actually one main shrine, and so that's centrally located here. So you see this large kind of shrine in the center, but it also has 4 smaller versions on the corners of this platform. So you say that it's raised up on a plinth or a platform with a central staircase leading up. So it has at the very top several peaks, and this is very traditional of the northern style of Hindu temple. And so from the video, you might remember that these are to represent mountain ranges, and so where the gods live. And so here's some of the basic vocabulary for the exterior of the temple. You might want to write it in your content section of your note takers. So the platform is called a plinth, right? I think if you just said it was a platform, that would be fine as well. So it kind of raises it, elevates it, shows its importance. And so then it has the largest, the Sakkara is the largest of the mountain peaks. And that one is where the axis mundi goes through the top of it. And underneath of it is where the image of the god is located. Then it also has several mandapas. So these smaller peaks that kind of lead up to the top of it. So here we have, the diagram that's from our textbook. And so here are some of those, some of those basic vocabulary again. And we saw this Amalaka at the very top. This is like this dome, or this donut kind of shape at the very top. And that is the part that connects it into the cosmos or into the other world, the not visible world, to the heavens. And then that axis mundi goes all the way through, connecting it to the earth and towards the ground. And inside, we have this chamber, right? So this chamber is called, often called the womb, or it's called the Garbhagriha. And that is where the image of the god is. So the image of the god could be, if it was Shiva, it could be an image of Shiva. It could be a lingam, which is a phallus symbol. Elephant actually had one of those. If you looked at the close-up, if you look closely at the image of the interior, through the columns, you actually see a phallus-shaped image of a god. But there also could be, sculptures of the different gods as well. So in your note takers or in your study guide, there is a diagram that looks like this. And so what I would probably do is to focus on these basic components of a Hindu temple. And then we will talk a little bit as well about how you are supposed to interact with the space as we go. So we have the mandapa, right? And this is basically like a hypostyle hall. You see some posts as well as some columns holding up the roof. You have our garbhagriha, or the womb chamber. And so this is where the God image is going to be. And then we have those subsidiary chapels that are on the sides. And I think from this diagram, you can really see that they are really just smaller versions of the larger shrine itself. I would say this whole thing is considered the temple. So let's think about, how are you supposed to experience this temple? So from looking at it, you can see that there is some space around the temple, right? There's this kind of like this walkway. So what you can do is you can circumambulate the entire temple from the exterior, right? So you can walk around it as many times as you choose. And then you can also walk up the central staircase. And so the design really does force you to move up to the plinth, up the staircase, and then be on that platform, right? And so as you are on that platform, you can then walk around, right, that structure as well. And then when you actually get into the temple, you have ways that you can also walk around or circumambulate. So you can walk around the entire structure as well as walk around the interior of the structure. And if you've ever been to a Hindu temple, you know that it's not always the most quiet place. There's a lot of ringing of the bells, some singing, some chanting, people in constant prayer. And so it's a very active space where you kind of move up the stairs, move inside, and then you can circumambulate. You can walk around the garbhagriha. And there's actually depiction of circumambulation on the exterior carvings. So here we can see people making that, that religious walk around the temple. There's also several power images of the Kandala dynasty. So here we have images of a lion conquering a man. And so those, power images are typical. And then there's other images incorporated on the facade as well. There are cult images, so religious images. There's images of family attendance with the divinities. There's heaven nymphs. There's animals and other like fantastical creatures. And then there's all the other things you would need in court. So people like teachers, disciples, dancers, musicians, and so on. So there's depictions of all of these things on the facades. Here we see along the plinth stairs, you actually can see Ganesh. And so he's there to kind of welcome you on your journey as you go into the temple. And so then on the southern side, closest to the Sakkara, there are a series of these sexually charged images. And so this one on the bottom is the one that's incorporated. So why would images of intimate couples be placed in this place between the mandapas and the vimana? So it's kind of like the interior space. Like, why would we have images there of all places at this temple? So these mithunas, are these images of couples normally engaged in a sexual union, and they come from tantric doctrine. So there's this book that kind of talks about sexual relations, and so in this book, sex is really important. It's ways of creating life, and it depicts the kind of the roles of the sexes. And so the male principle is dominated by form and potential, and then the female is dominated through her energy. And so the combination of these two forces create all life. And so you can't achieve anything without those sexual relations, right? You can't have prosperity of the people. You can't propagate the, our species of humans. And so it's not seen as something that is pornographic or obscene. It is seen as imagery that promotes fertility. So if we go back to, right, the image back here, right, and thinking about where this is located, it makes sense that these sexual images are located near the Sakara and the Garbhagriha, right? Because that is a womb, and that's where the image of the god is. And so that is, kind of continues the prosperity of the people, and is all about kind of like fertility, because the Garbhagriha, remember, is a womb-like space. And then the lingam is often seen as a male symbol. And so it's the union of male and female components. Just keep in mind that this one has an image of Vishnu, which we will see. So if you were going to look at the style of these sculptures, how would you characterize them? Are they super realistic? Right? So they are not realistic, they're stylized. The proportions are slightly off. You can see that the heads are quite large, and so they're probably more like 6 heads tall. And then there's an exaggeration of kind of the plumpness of their skin. They feel very soft and supple, which pretty much goes with the function of this being, a sexual union. And so you can see that the poses are kind of exaggerated. You'd have to do a lot of yoga to be able to bend like this. And so here we have that couple engaged in a embrace. So this is probably, a very mild sort of image. It's like PG-13, right? So here we can see some of that carving as we move up and how complex the surface is, right? And then as you are inside, you can't see those sexual images. That's all on the outside. When you walk through here, you would then circumambulate the Garbhagriha. So a lot of times on these plans, they'll give them sort of like our English or Western vocabulary. So they'll often talk about this being like a hypostyle hall. They'll talk about transepts. So we haven't talked about a transept yet because we haven't seen Romanesque churches, but those are the perpendicular elements of a church. So we have like nave, right, in a church, and then we have transepts that go across in the shape of a cross. You can see that it has 2 of those. And then this circular path, right, is called an ambulatory. It's where you would walk around it. So people circumambulate the Garbhagriha, which is the most holy of the chambers. It's typically very small and not, people don't typically go inside of it. They basically see it from the doorway. And so inside here, we have our image of Vishnu. And so only typically the monks or the priests go inside of there, and you can see it from the exterior. So this is something that you would walk around, but you would never actually go in it or touch. Now, the construction of this temple is done with what we call corbel vaulting. And so this is where you basically stack blocks around. So this is very different than the vasors that we saw in ancient Rome, where they're wedge-like shapes that fit together. And so ashlar masonry is basically where we have a series of stones of different shapes that are stacked together rather than with regularity. Okay. Our next image is an object, and this is the Shiva of Nataraja, the Lord of the Dance. And this is from the Chola dynasty of southern India. So we were just in northern, now this is southern, and this region is known for its metalwork. And so the function of this, how is it more than just an image of the god? You might want to read in Smart History the section on the Shiva, which is made for mobility, right? And think about how it's used. The link for it is right here. Right? So this is a processional object. it would not always be seen the way that it is here, just made out of bronze. It's often decorated, dressed. It would often have jewels on it, and it would be carried in a procession. So you see here, it's almost like they made a float for it that would be used during religious festivals. So if you look at this image, you might remember that Shiva is a protector, or a destroyer, but he also is a creator of life. And so when you look at it closely, what images do you see, or what parts of the image do you see that show him being a creator as well as a destroyer? Right. So let's go ahead and we're going to break this apart. So let's go ahead and characterize his face, right? Does he have the face of a destroyer or a creator? Right? His face is pretty calm. You notice that he's got a serene expression. So he's got more of that creator face. And then he also has that third eye. And if you've ever done some yoga, you remember that this is kind of your spiritual eye, that it's all-seeing eye. And then these are the different components that we'll look at that will be able to kind of illustrate his, his duality of his function. So he is dancing in a ring of fire. So we have this ring here, and these little things that look like hands are actually the flames. And it is a continuation of the creation and the destruction of the universe. So this is something that is never ending, hence it being a circular shape. So we got destroyer imagery, right? But keep in mind that without fire, we also don't have rebirth. And so then in his upper right hand, he holds a damaru, and the damaru is a drum. And so there is a syncopation of the universe. So basically is a way of measuring time. We have the beat of the drum, and it represents the continuation of time in life. Each of his hands, right, are gesturing into different mudras. And so his mudra on his lower left hand, which is diagonally going across his chest, signifies his spiritual grace and the fulfillment that he reaches through meditation. He can, get rid of any sort of primal desires that he might have. If you notice, he's got 1, 2, 3, 4 arms. His lower right hand is in the mudra, do not be afraid, follow the path of the righteous, will have my blessing. In the lower left, he has that spiritual meditation and oneness, right? And then he also, on the opposite hand, has a fire, right? So he has the Agni, right? And thinking about how this fire and the dance relate to the Damaru and the Agni, this idea that his dance is continuing life and destruction, but recreation and birth as we go through. So the fire actually destroys that sound. So it's this balancing force. Fire is very loud, right? His hair is quite interesting. It comes out really long and kind of spirals, like radiates out, almost like light rays. And that is to represent the fire of the universe. He has the hair of yogis. Yogis don't typically cut their hair. It's rather long. And then at the very bottom, there's an apsara. And an apsara is an image of a dwarf. And so in part of the religious faith, these are seen as demon images. And so here Shiva stands over, he kind of pounces and stomps on this dwarf that symbolizes ignorance, right? So the form of this one, would you characterize it as being super realistic? No, it's definitely stylized. However, this one is also built on a canon of proportion. So just like Dorpheus, where there was a system of a canon proportion, this one also has that, where the head is a certain size, the proportions of the different arms, the legs, the body positions are all things that are characteristic of the Shukla Shastra, which is this Indian canon of ideal beauty and proportion.